I know who you are. I've known for 2 weeks, and I swear to God I was going to tell you tonight. When a stranger texted Callie Nguyen by mistake 3 months ago, she never expected to fall for someone she'd never seen. She never expected that the man on the other end of those messages, funny, sharp, achingly honest in ways people rarely are in real life, would turn out to be Marcus Webb, the corporate director sent to decide whether her branch lives or dies. He knew before she did. He said nothing. And when the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't arrive quietly. It arrives in a boardroom, weaponized by someone with everything to lose. Now Callie has one choice: protect herself or go all in on the most reckless thing she's ever done. The number you didn't mean to call. The text came in at 8:47 on a Thursday night, while Callie Nguyen was sitting cross-legged on her kitchen floor eating leftover pad thai and dreading the morning. Hey, still on for 7. I'm thinking oleander on 5th, but open to suggestions if you hate it. She stared at the message for a moment. The number wasn't saved in her contacts. The area code was Chicago, she knew, because her college roommate had moved there, and Callie had spent 2 years accidentally memorizing the prefix. But this wasn't her roommate's number. This was someone she didn't know at all. The sensible thing was to ignore it. People sent wrong number texts all the time, and the equally sensible recipient said nothing. Let the sender figure it out when their actual friend never replied and moved on. Callie was, by most measures, a sensible person. She had color-coded spreadsheets for her grocery lists. She had backup folders for her backup folders. She had learned the hard way not to open doors that didn't belong to her. She typed back anyway. Wrong number, but for what it's worth, I've heard oleander has a 40-minute wait on Fridays, and the pasta is only okay. She expected nothing. She got a reply in under a minute. Well, now I feel like an idiot on 2 fronts. Thanks for the oleander intel, though. Genuinely useful. Sorry for interrupting your night. You didn't interrupt anything. I'm sitting on my kitchen floor eating cold noodles. That's either very sad or very zen. I can't decide which. Bit of both, she typed. Sorry about your dinner plans. Don't be. Honestly, this is already more interesting. She laughed, a short, surprised sound, the kind that escapes before you can decide whether it's appropriate. She set the pad thai container on the counter. Outside, Austin in late October was doing its usual thing. Warm enough that the windows were still open, cool enough that she'd pulled a flannel over her shoulders. The ceiling fan turned slowly. The city made its low, constant noise. I'm going to set a rule, she typed, because she had learned that rules were the only reason anything in her life stayed where it belonged. No names, no photos, no details that would let either of us figure out who the other one is. The reply took longer this time. She wondered if she'd killed it if the stranger on the other end had decided this was too strange, too particular. The kind of condition only a weird person attached to a conversation that should have ended 3 messages ago. Okay, he wrote. Why? It was a fair question. She thought about it honestly, which was easier to do with a stranger than with anyone who actually knew her. Because I talk to enough people in my real life who want something from me, she wrote. It's nice to talk to someone who can't. Another pause. Then, that's the most honest thing anyone said to me in about 6 months. See, she wrote. Already better than oleander. He sent back a single, laughing emoji, the kind with tears, which she privately felt was the correct one for situations that were actually funny, rather than just mildly amusing. And then he wrote, I'm M. That's all you're getting. I'm fine with that, she wrote back. I'm nobody in particular. Everybody's somebody in particular, M wrote. You just might not have found your particular yet. She read it twice. Then she put her phone down on the kitchen floor, looked up at the ceiling fan making its slow circles, and thought, well, that's a thing someone said. She picked the phone back up. Same time tomorrow, she wrote. I'll be here, he replied. The thing about Austin in October was that it was the best version of the city past the brutal summer, not yet into the strange, mild winter that never quite felt like winter. Callie had been here for 4 years, long enough to stop noticing the things that visitors photographed and start noticing the things that mattered. Which coffee shops filled up by 7:15? Which parking structure had an attendant who'd look the other way if you were running 3 minutes late? Which route from her apartment to the Hartwell Group building let her avoid the intersection that backed up every morning between 7:50 and 8:10? She was the branch manager of Hartwell Group's Austin office, a mid-sized position at a mid-sized branch of a large corporation that specialized in commercial real estate development and property consulting. The Austin branch had 41 employees, 3 ongoing development projects, and a revenue record that Callie had spent 4 years building from unremarkable to something she was genuinely proud of. It wasn't a flashy job. It wasn't the kind of thing that made people's eyes light up at parties. But it was hers, and she had built it carefully, the way she built everything, with color-coded spreadsheets and backup folders, and rules she set for herself, so she knew exactly where the edges were. The trouble was that the edges had been shifting lately. 3 weeks ago, the regional director had called her personally, which he never did. He sent emails with long subject lines and too many bullet points, and told her that Hartwell's parent company, Webb Holdings, was conducting an operational review of several of its subsidiary branches. Austin was on the list. A director would be coming down from Chicago to evaluate performance, consult with staff, and make a recommendation to the full board about the branch's future. "What does that mean, exactly?" Callie had asked. "For the branch. It means," the regional director said in the careful tone of a man who had delivered this kind of news before, "that someone will be coming to look, and depending on what they see, they'll decide whether Austin stays as it is, gets restructured, or gets folded into the Houston office." She had thanked him politely, hung up, and spent the next 4 hours rebuilding her revenue projections from scratch. That had been 3 weeks ago. The director from Chicago hadn't arrived yet. In the meantime, she had 41 people's jobs to protect, 3 projects to keep on track, and a stranger in Chicago she was texting every night, who had no idea any of it was happening. She hadn't told M. It wasn't that she was hiding it. She'd mentioned she worked in something she called the business of convincing people a building is worth what it isn't, which had made him laugh and ask 3 follow-up questions that were genuinely smart. But the specifics review the threat. The 41 people, she kept those in the other compartment, the one that belonged to her real life, where people had faces and something to gain. With M, she talked about other things, the book she was reading and had opinions about. The weird loyalty she felt toward a particular brand of instant coffee that she knew was objectively inferior. The way she had never learned to parallel park without doing it twice, and had simply accepted this as a permanent feature of her character. He told her about his complicated relationship with his family's expectations about a city he loved and also needed distance from. About how he'd started going on long drives on weekends just to think, without anyone expecting something from him. "You sound lonely," she typed one night 3 weeks in. "I am," he wrote back, without any of the deflection she'd expected. "Is that a problem?" "No," she typed. "It just means I understand you better than I expected to." That night, she fell asleep with her phone on the pillow next to her. Not because she was waiting for a message, but because she'd gotten used to the weight of it there. 6 weeks in, on a night when she was working late and the office was empty and the Austin skyline was doing something beautiful through the floor-to-ceiling windows, M asked her what she was actually afraid of. Not professionally, not in the abstract, what she was actually, specifically afraid of. She took a long time answering. "That I built something real," she finally typed, "and someone who doesn't understand what it cost is going to take it apart because the numbers on a spreadsheet told them to." She hadn't meant to say that much. It was too specific, too close to the thing she was actually living. But M had asked in a way that made honesty feel less like exposure and more like just saying a true thing to someone who could hear it. "That's a real fear," he wrote, "not irrational. Some people do exactly that." "Have you ever been that person?" she asked. The pause was longer than usual. "I've made decisions that felt strategic at the time," he wrote, "and then lived with what they cost." That's not really an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. But it's all I've got tonight. She accepted it. That was another thing about Em. She didn't push. She'd spent so much of her real life pushing through resistance, arguing for her decisions, defending her numbers, that the ease of not having to felt like taking off shoes she'd forgotten she was wearing. She turned off the office lights at 10:15 and drove home the long way past the lake where the city's reflection lay bright and broken on the water. Her phone buzzed as she pulled into her parking spot. "Wrong door, right room," Em had written. "That's what you are. Whatever door I was actually supposed to walk through, I'm glad I missed it." She sat in the car for a full minute, not moving, just reading it. Then she went inside, and she did not let herself think about what it meant that she was happy, more straightforwardly, uncomplicatedly happy than she had been in longer than she wanted to calculate, because of a message from a man whose face she had never seen. She was a sensible person. She had rules for a reason. She just hadn't written a rule for this yet. By the end of the first month, Callie had developed a theory about Em. He was detail-oriented in the way that people were when their job required it. Not naturally tidy, she suspected, but trained into a kind of precision that he'd internalized so completely he couldn't always tell where the discipline ended and the instinct began. She noticed it in the way he answered questions, thorough structured but with an occasional sentence that veered off into something unexpectedly personal before he seemed to catch himself and pull back. He was also, she thought, accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, and slightly uncomfortable with that fact. Not arrogant about it, the opposite, actually. Like he'd figured out early that being the sharpest edge in a conversation wasn't always the best thing to be, and had spent years learning to dull himself down in company. With her, he didn't dull himself down. She thought about that more than she probably should have. "Question," he texted one Tuesday night. "If you could go anywhere, not a vacation, not a weekend trip, but actually go somewhere and start over, where would it be?" She was eating at her kitchen table. For once, a real meal. She'd cooked from a recipe and everything. And she read the message while the pasta was getting cold again because she kept getting distracted. "Honest answer or interesting answer?" she typed. "They should be the same answer." "They usually aren't." "Then both," he wrote. "Give me both." Interesting answer somewhere with no Wi-Fi and a view of something big. Mountains or ocean, doesn't matter which. Somewhere that makes me feel correctly small. And honest answer. She looked around her kitchen, the spider plant on the windowsill that she'd kept alive for 3 years against all odds, the coffee mug with the chip on the handle she kept meaning to throw out and never did, the notepad on the counter with the week's to-do list in her handwriting. "Honest answer is that I wouldn't go anywhere," she wrote. "I'd stay exactly where I am, because everything I actually care about is here, and I spent too long building it to walk away." "That's not a sad answer," Em wrote. "That's actually a good one." "You sound surprised." "I'm not. I just think most people would have said the mountains." "Most people haven't had to fight to keep what they have," she typed, and then immediately worried it was too much, too close to the thing she'd been deliberately keeping out of these conversations. But Em just wrote, "No, most people haven't." And she understood somehow that he knew what she meant. Not the specifics, she'd kept those carefully contained, but the shape of it, the particular weight of something you'd built and were now being made to defend. She poured herself another glass of water and decided not to think too hard about how well he understood. The second month began with a nor'easter hitting Chicago. Em mentioned it briefly, which was the closest either of them ever got to geography, and Callie was deep in preparation for the arrival of the Webb Holdings director. The regional director had confirmed the visit would happen before the end of November. He still hadn't said who was coming. She threw herself into the work with the particular intensity she reserved for things that mattered. She pulled every data point the branch had generated in the past 4 years. Revenue, client retention project completion rates, cost efficiency ratios, staff retention numbers, community partnerships. She built the case the way she would build any case, not by obscuring the weaknesses, but by contextualizing them, by showing exactly what had been difficult and exactly what she'd done about it, by making it impossible for anyone looking at her brand with honest eyes to conclude that it was anything other than what she'd made it: functional, growing, worth keeping. She didn't tell M about any of it. She told him about a client who'd called her at 6 in the morning to change specifications on a project for the 4th time, and how she'd handled it with what she described as diplomatic language and white-knuckled restraint. She told him about the coffee from the cart outside her building that was inexplicably better than anything available inside. She told him about the raccoon she'd seen on her balcony at 2 in the morning, sitting with the gravity and self-possession of a judge. "What did he do?" Em asked. "He looked at me for a long time," she said, "like he was deciding something. Then he left." "Wise animal," Em wrote. "Knows when it's time to go." "I disagree," she typed. "He came for something and he didn't get it, and he's going to come back." You identify with the raccoon. I identify with refusing to give up on a balcony that belongs to me, she wrote. He sent the crying, laughing emoji again. Then, "You're the most stubborn person I've never met. Is that a complaint?" "Absolutely not," he wrote. "It's one of my favorite things about you." She read that last sentence 4 times. Then she put her phone face down on her desk and stared at her revenue projections for a while, not really seeing them, thinking about how strange it was that someone she'd never met had favorite things about her, and that she had favorite things about him too. His directness, his honesty, the way he didn't perform casualness when he was genuinely interested in something, the way he'd once stayed up until 2 in the morning with her talking about whether integrity was a strategy or a character flaw, and they'd never actually concluded anything, and neither of them had wanted to stop. She picked her phone back up. "I have favorite things about you too," she typed. "Yeah." His reply was immediate. "Yeah, I'll tell you what they are when I figure out which order to put them in." "I'll wait," he wrote. "I'm good at waiting when it's worth it." She fell asleep that night thinking about a man she'd never seen in a city getting buried in snow, waiting for something she hadn't said yet. 10 days before the Webb Holdings director was scheduled to arrive, Callie's assistant manager Priya stopped her in the hallway after a staff meeting and said, with the careful neutrality of someone about to say something she knew would land badly, "I heard from David in Houston that the guy they're sending is Marcus Webb." Callie went very still. "As in," she said, "the Webb in Webb Holdings?" "Youngest son," Priya said. "He's the one who's been running operational reviews for the past 2 years. Closed the Denver branch, restructured Memphis." She paused. "He has a reputation for being thorough." "Thorough," Callie repeated. "And not particularly warm." "Great," Callie said. She went back to her office, closed the door, and sat for a moment in the particular silence that comes when something you've been bracing for acquires a name and a face and becomes suddenly, specifically real. Marcus Webb. She pulled up his professional profile. There wasn't much. He kept a notably low presence for someone of his position, and found a photo that showed a man who looked like he'd been assembled by someone with strong opinions about what authority should look like. Jaw posture, the eyes of someone accustomed to reading rooms before he entered them. She closed the tab. Then she opened her text thread with M. She'd never named it anything, just kept it in her recent messages, and typed, "Do you ever wish you could just skip to the part where you know how something is going to turn out?" "Every day," he wrote back. "Does that mean you've got something coming you're dreading?" "Something I've prepared for as well as I possibly can," she typed, which isn't the same as not dreading it. "No," he agreed, "but it's the right approach. You can't control outcomes. You can only control what you bring to them." Very philosophical for a Wednesday. "I have my moments," he wrote. "You're going to be fine, you know." She didn't answer that. She just sent back, "Wrong door, right room, remember?" "That's what you said." "I remember," he wrote. "I meant it." She looked out her window at the Austin skyline, the particular slant of late afternoon light, the way the buildings caught it and gave it back in a dozen different angles, and thought, "Whatever comes, I built this. I built it, and it's real, and nobody can take the building of it away from me." Then she closed her phone and went back to her spreadsheets, because the building of it wasn't finished yet. 3 months of someone you've never seen. Marcus Webb arrived on a Monday which Callie had always thought was the most aggressive possible day to begin anything difficult. There was something philosophically hostile about a Monday arrival. No easing in, no grace period, just the immediate full weight of a thing that needed to be dealt with. She was ready for him anyway. She had prepared the branch the way she prepared everything, completely with attention to detail, with no false notes. The conference room was set with current performance data printed in a format that was readable rather than decorative. The staff had been briefed not on what to say, but on the truth, which was that the branch was performing well, and that performing well was the best case they could make. Priya had arranged a meeting schedule that gave the director time with each department head. Callie had written and then deleted and then rewritten her opening remarks 3 times until they sounded like something she would actually say rather than something she was performing. Marcus Webb walked into the Austin branch of Hartwell Group at 8:50 on a Monday morning, and the first thing Callie noticed was that he looked exactly like his photo, and nothing like she'd imagined. The photo had given her authority. What it hadn't given her was the particular quality of attention he brought into a room, the way his eyes moved across the space before settling, the way he seemed to be running a quiet calculation behind whatever he was actually doing. He shook hands with the front desk coordinator. He said good morning to the 2 staff members who were visible from the entrance. He did it all with a kind of automatic courtesy that was professional rather than warm, and Callie recognized it because she had done it herself in difficult rooms. Be pleasant, be contained, give nothing away. She met him in the conference room. He came in 2 minutes before the scheduled start time, which she noted and filed. "Ms. Nguyen," he said. "Mr. Webb?" she said. "Welcome to Austin." "Thank you." He set his laptop bag on the table with the efficiency of someone who had done this in a lot of conference rooms. "I've reviewed your preliminary reports. I have some questions about the Q3 cost efficiency numbers." She had expected pleasantries, or at least the shape of them. She hadn't expected to be in the data within 30 seconds. She recalibrated instantly. "Specifically," she asked. "You show a 12% overhead reduction quarter over quarter," he said, opening his laptop with the same contained efficiency. "But your project completion rate also dropped 4 points. I want to understand whether those 2 things are related." "They are," she said, pulling up her own files, because she had expected exactly this question and had prepared exactly this answer. The overhead reduction came from a renegotiated vendor contract on materials supply for the Riverside project. The completion rate dip in Q3 reflects a 6-week delay caused by a permitting issue that was outside our control and has since been resolved. The 2 numbers are related, but not causally. The drop didn't happen because of the cost reduction. It happened in spite of a cost reduction that was keeping the project viable during a delay. He looked at her for a moment. Not an unfriendly look, more the look of someone updating a file. "Walk me through the permitting timeline," he said. She walked him through it. He asked good questions, genuinely good. The kind that meant he'd actually read the reports rather than skimmed them. The kind she'd have asked herself if she were in his position. She answered all of them. At no point did she soften the difficult parts or oversell the strong ones, because she had long since learned that people who knew what they were looking at could spot both kinds of distortion and trusted neither. When they'd been at it for 50 minutes, she said, "Do you want to take a break and see the floor?" He looked up from his laptop. "Yes," he said in a tone that suggested the question was reasonable. That would be useful. She led him out of the conference room, and she couldn't help noticing that his attention shifted when he was on the floor, in the same way it had shifted when he walked in, outward first, then particular. He watched how people moved in the space. He noticed who spoke to whom. He paused at the project board without making a production of it, and she watched him take in the current status of all 3 active projects with the quick reading comprehension of someone very familiar with this kind of visual data. The Riverside project, he said, without looking away from the board. The lead consultant is Priya Kapoor. Yes, she's been on that project since the beginning. She knows it better than anyone. I'd like to speak with her this afternoon, he said. She's available at 2, Callie said, because she had scheduled exactly this. He turned from the board then, and for just a moment, before the professional filter went back up, he looked almost approving. Or maybe she was projecting. She had spent 4 years reading people in rooms, and she was not always right. You prepared well, he said. It could have been a compliment. It could also have been an observation about the strategic nature of her preparation. She chose to receive it as the former, and answered the way she would have regardless. I always do. The first week established a pattern. Marcus arrived early, asked thorough questions, gave very little away. Callie answered every question completely, pushed back when the pushback was warranted, and maintained the exact professional distance that the situation required. They did not have personal conversations. They did not share meals. Once in the hallway, they arrived at a doorway at the same moment, and both stopped, and she said, "After you," and he said, "I've got it," simultaneously. And they both stepped back, and there was a half-second of something that was almost a smile on his face before it went away. At night, she texted M. She did not tell him about the review. She'd made that decision weeks ago, and she maintained it now, partly because her rules were her rules, partly because she was finding that the separation between the two was doing something important for her. Marcus Webb's presence in her professional life was exhausting, in the specific way that careful, capable people were exhausting. She had to be on completely, all the time, and it used her up in a way that the ordinary demands of the job never did. With M, she could put it all down. "I've been thinking about the wrong door thing you said," she wrote one Wednesday night, sitting in her car in the parking garage, because she hadn't quite been ready to go home. "Do you think it's possible to actually find the right room by accident? Or does it only feel that way in retrospect?" "I think," M wrote, and she could always tell when he was being careful with a thought rather than just typing. There was a particular rhythm to his longer messages, a kind of deliberateness. That the accident is usually real. The right room part is what you build once you're in it. So luck gets you through the door, she wrote, and then it's all on you. More or less, which is terrifying, obviously. Extremely, she agreed. Do you think about that? About whether you're in the right room? Lately, yeah, he wrote, more than usual. She sat in the parking garage for another 10 minutes, reading that message over, thinking about rooms and doors and the strange arithmetic of chance. Me too, she finally wrote. Is that good or bad? He asked. I don't know yet, she typed. I'll tell you when I do. 10 days into the review, Marcus presented his preliminary observations to Callie in a 40-minute meeting that she would have called with complete accuracy, the most uncomfortable 40 minutes of her professional year. Not because he was harsh, he was measured, careful, specific. The same quality of attention he brought to everything, but measured and careful and specific about the potential restructuring of something you spent 4 years building hits differently than the same qualities applied to, say, a vendor contract. He walked through the branch's strengths first, genuinely, she noted, not in the performative way that people led with positives before delivering the real verdict. He identified things she was proud of, the staff retention rate, which was 12 points above the industry average, the community development partnership she'd built with a local nonprofit that had generated both goodwill and referrals, the cost structures she'd renegotiated. He named them specifically. He had clearly read everything. Then he said, the area I have the most questions about is long-term growth trajectory. Your current revenue is solid. The question the board will want answered is whether this branch has the infrastructure to scale or whether it's reached a ceiling that makes consolidation with Houston more efficient long-term. It hasn't reached a ceiling, she said with the flatness of someone stating a fact. What's your evidence for that? She had prepared for this, too. She opened the file she'd built over the past 3 weeks, the growth model, the market analysis, the 3-year projections built on actual data rather than optimistic assumptions, and she walked him through it. She was thorough. She was specific. She did not let herself be defensive because she had learned that defensiveness looked like weakness, even when it wasn't, and she could not afford to look like anything other than what she was. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. "This is good work," he said. She waited. "I'm not ready to make a recommendation yet," he added. "I want to spend more time with the Q4 data before I do, but I want you to know that nothing I've seen here suggests the branch is failing. The question is whether it can grow." "It can," she said. "I believe you believe that," he said, and there was something in the phrasing that suggested he hadn't made up his own mind yet, and she held on to the part where he hadn't made up his own mind yet, because it meant there was still a decision to be made, which meant it wasn't over. He closed his laptop. He looked at her for a moment with that particular quality of attention she'd noticed from the beginning, the assessment that never quite turned off, and said, "You built this branch into something real. I can see that." She absorbed this without letting any of it show. "I know," she said. Something shifted in his face, brief, almost invisible, but she'd been watching closely enough. He looked for just one moment like he wanted to say something else. Then he put his laptop back in his bag, said, "I'll have more questions Thursday," and left. Callie sat in the empty conference room for a while after he was gone, looking at the table where his coffee cup had been, and did not examine why she was looking at it. That night she told Em, "Someone told me today that I built something real, and I couldn't decide whether that was a compliment or a threat." "Why a threat?" Em asked. "Because people acknowledge that something is real right before they take it apart," she said. "It's like saying the house is beautiful right before you tell the family they have to move." "That's a cynical read," Em wrote. "I come by it honestly. What if they just meant it? What if real was all they meant?" She thought about Marcus Webb's face when he said it, that flicker of something she couldn't categorize, the moment before he put his bag back on his shoulder and left. "I don't know," she wrote. "I'm not always great at telling the difference." "Occupational hazard," Em wrote. "When everything is strategic, it's hard to see when something isn't." "Are you strategic?" she asked before she could decide not to. The pause this time was the longest he'd ever taken. Long enough that she'd put her phone down and was washing her dishes when it buzzed. "More than I should be," he wrote. "Working on it." She dried her hands. She read it twice. She typed back, "Me too." Then she went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about two men, one who was present and evaluating, one who was absent and honest, and the uncomfortable truth that she was having better conversations with the one whose face she'd never seen. It was in the middle of the third week of Marcus's presence at the branch that Callie saw it. She'd been watching him the way she watched everything in her professional space, not obviously just with the peripheral attention of someone who understood that information was useful and visibility was power. And what she saw was this Marcus was by every measure doing his job. He was also, every so often, not entirely here. Not distracted in a careless way, more like pulled in a direction he wasn't going to name. Twice she'd looked up from her desk to find him paused in the hallway outside her glass-walled office, looking at something in the middle distance that wasn't any of their shared data. Once in the elevator, he'd answered a question she'd asked about Q4 metrics, and then gone quiet, and she'd had the sudden strange certainty that he was thinking about something else entirely. She filed it. She didn't use it for anything, but she filed it. The thing that broke the professional equilibrium was small and absurd, the way the things that actually break equilibrium usually were. She was presenting to him in the conference room, just the two of them, late on a Thursday afternoon, the light outside going amber the way it did in November, and she was making the case for the Riverside project's long-term value, and she said, "It's a wrong door situation. We came at this project sideways, not through the standard acquisition process, and initially that looked like a weakness, but we ended up in exactly the right room." She said it without thinking. It was her phrase, or M's phrase, or both of theirs. She'd used it enough in her professional thinking that it had migrated from her private vocabulary to her general one without her noticing. She looked up from her data and found Marcus looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully decode. Not professional neutral, not assessing, something else entirely. A flash of something sharp and surprised and quickly controlled. "Wrong door, right room," he repeated. "Figure of speech," she said, because something in his expression made her want to explain it away. "Right," he said, and he looked back down at his laptop, and the moment passed, and they continued the meeting, and it was entirely possible she had imagined the whole thing. That night, texting M, she wrote, "Do you have phrases you use so often they stop being yours?" "What do you mean?" "Things you say that started as something someone else said," she typed, "or something you figured out together, and then they become so much a part of how you think that you forget they came from somewhere." "Yeah," M wrote. "I have a few of those." A pause. "Is one of them wrong door, right room?" Her thumbs went still on the screen. "How did you know that?" she asked. "You've said it a couple of times," he wrote easily. "It's a good one. Makes sense you'd use it more." She exhaled. Of course. She'd said it to him too multiple times. She was projecting because she was tired, and because Marcus's expression had been strange, and because her brain was apparently determined to create patterns out of coincidences. "Yeah," she typed. "It's a good one." "Wrong door, right room," M wrote. "That's us, you know. That's still what I think we are." She looked at that for a long moment. Outside her apartment window, Austin was making its night sounds. Traffic, the distant music from the bar in the corner, the whole low hum of a city doing what it did. "I think so too," she wrote. "I'm just not always sure what the room is." "Maybe you don't have to know yet," M said. "Maybe you just have to stay in it." She said goodnight a little while later, put her phone on the nightstand, and lay in the dark with the slow ceiling fan overhead and the feeling she hadn't been able to shake for weeks now. The feeling that something was about to happen, something that would require her to be very clear about what she actually wanted. She wasn't sure she was ready. She stayed in the room anyway. The second text came on a Tuesday. Callie had meant to send it to M. She'd been in the middle of a thought, the kind that arrived suddenly and needed to land somewhere, and she'd been typing without looking at the thread header, and she'd hit send before she realized she'd opened the wrong conversation. She sent it to Marcus Webb's work number, which he'd given her the first week for coordinating meeting schedules. The text said, "Do you think there's a version of Brave that isn't terrifying? Because I'm looking for that version and I can't find it." She realized the mistake immediately. Her stomach dropped in the specific way it dropped when something irreversible happened. The physical sensation of a door clicking shut behind you before you'd decided to walk through it. She typed, "Sorry, wrong number," and sent it before his reply came through. His reply said, "No, I don't think there is, but I think that's the point." She stared at both messages in sequence, her accident, his answer. And then she called Priya and said she needed to reschedule her 2 o'clock for reasons she didn't specify. And then she sat in her office looking at the city and tried to think very clearly. He was quoting her. Or not quoting, answering. He'd answered the question directly, genuinely, without the professional buffer that characterized literally every other exchange they'd had in 3 weeks. He hadn't said, "I think you sent this to the wrong number," or "This seems personal." He just answered. She sent him a follow-up. "Just a random thought I was working through. Not professional. Sorry for the intrusion." He replied 2 minutes later. "Don't be." That was all. 2 words. She spent the rest of the afternoon being very professional and very composed and not thinking about it at all. In the thread with M that night, she typed, "Have you ever accidentally shown someone more than you meant to?" "In what sense?" M asked. "In the sense of saying a true thing to the wrong person, and then not being able to unsay it." "Yeah," M wrote. "Once or twice?" "What did you do?" "Depended on whether the true thing was worth the exposure," he wrote. "Sometimes it was. Sometimes I should have pulled back faster." "Which one is harder to live with?" she asked. "Pulling back too fast," he said, without hesitation. Always. You can recover from saying too much. You can't always recover from saying too little. She read that twice. Then she wrote, I think you might be braver than me. I'm really not, he said. I just have a better view of my own mistakes in retrospect. She laughed at that in the quiet of her kitchen, the laugh that escaped before she could decide about it. Same, she wrote. Deeply same. 2 days after the wrong number text to Marcus, she noticed a change. Not dramatic. Nothing Marcus Webb did was dramatic. He seemed constitutionally opposed to it. But small, specific things. He started ending their afternoon review meetings 10 minutes later than scheduled. Not obviously, just they'd be finishing up, and there'd be one more question, and then the answer to that question would prompt a follow-up. And by the time they'd sorted through it, they were reliably running 10 minutes past. He asked on a Wednesday if she'd eaten. They'd been at it since noon, and it was 2:40, and she hadn't, and she said so. And he said he was going to the sandwich cart downstairs and asked if she wanted anything. He brought back exactly what she'd described, without being told twice. She ate it at her desk, alone, because he didn't suggest eating together, but he'd brought it. She told herself this meant nothing. She told herself this so many times that the telling started to feel like the thing that meant something. The strangest moment came on a Friday afternoon when they were wrapping up for the week, and he was packing his laptop bag, and she was making notes for the Monday follow-up. And he said, without looking up, "You built this branch for the people in it, not for the numbers." She looked up. He was still focused on his bag. "Both," she said. "The people make the numbers work. You can't separate them." "No," he said. He looked up then. "You can't." There was something in his face she still couldn't name, something that was careful in a different way than his professional careful. Not controlled exactly, more like held. Like something that was there, and he knew it was there, and he was choosing quite deliberately what to do with it. She chose quite deliberately to look back down at her notes. "See you Monday," she said. "See you Monday," he said, and left. She sat for a moment after he was gone, looking at her notes without reading them, and then she looked at her phone and thought about texting M, and decided not to. Not because she didn't want to, because she was starting to be afraid of what she would say. The thing about keeping two separate worlds was that it required vigilance. Callie had maintained that vigilance for 3 months, through the early weeks when M was just a pleasant accident. Through the middle weeks when it became clear that what was happening in that thread was real in a way she hadn't anticipated. Through the most recent weeks when the two worlds had moved physically closer because the person who occupied one of them had arrived in her actual building. She had maintained the vigilance by being strict with herself. No professional details with M. No personal details with Marcus. 2 separate channels. No interference. What she hadn't accounted for was the fact that you could keep information separate while being utterly unable to keep the person separate. Because she was starting to understand, in the quiet, reluctant way that you understood things you didn't entirely want to understand, that what she felt when she talked to M, that ease, that sense of being met, was not entirely different from what she felt in the moments when Marcus's professional mask slipped and he said something true. She didn't do anything with this understanding. She filed it like she filed everything in a category she labeled "not relevant right now," and she continued to be professional with Marcus and honest with M, and completely composed in all visible directions. The problem was that the category was getting full. Diane Webb called Marcus on a Thursday evening. Callie didn't know this, couldn't have known, and asked him with the particular casualness that was never actually casual how things were going in Austin. "Fine," Marcus said. He was in his hotel room, sitting in the dark with the city lights, doing something bright outside the window, not quite ready to turn on the lamp. "Just fine," Diane said. "Productive," he said. "The branch is performing better than the preliminary numbers suggested. The manager is thorough, and she knows what she's doing." "The manager?" Diane said. "Callie Nguyen." "Yes, I heard she's impressive," Diane said in a tone that suggested she had researched this information deliberately and found it relevant. "She is," Marcus said. It came out with less professional distance than he intended, and he heard himself say it and felt the slight miscalibration. Marcus, Diane said. Her voice had changed, slightly sharpened by the fraction that meant she was paying close attention. Do you have a personal interest in the Austin branch manager? I have a professional interest in the Austin branch, he said. That's what I was sent to evaluate. Right, Diane said. Of course. And the way she said it, even without inflection, made it impossible to know whether she believed him. Marcus didn't know in that moment whether she should. He'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, the knowledge he'd stumbled into and then held on to, and then told himself he was going to put down, and kept not putting down. The text that had come to his work number. Do you think there's a version of brave that isn't terrifying? The phrase he'd been hearing for 2 weeks, wrong door, right room, which appeared in documents he'd read 3 months ago before he'd ever set foot in Austin, in a user account flagged as anonymous in a company internal messaging archive he'd accessed as part of a different operational review that had left a thread open on his work laptop. He'd known for 12 days. He had not told her. He told himself it was strategic that revealing it mid-review would complicate the professional relationship and potentially compromise the review's integrity. He'd told himself there'd be a right moment after the review, when it could be separated from the work. He told himself a lot of things that were partially true, and not the whole story, because the whole story was that he had found something in 3 months of texts to someone he couldn't see. That felt like the first honest conversation he'd had in years, and he was terrified that naming it would break it. He recognized exactly the kind of person he tried not to be. I'll have the preliminary report to the board by the end of next week, he told Diane. Good, she said. The board is eager. A pause. I'm eager too. She hung up. Marcus sat in the dark hotel room and thought about Callie Nguyen describing her branch as a wrong door situation, and the way she'd looked when she said it, the unconscious thing in her face, the way she'd said it, and then looked up to find him looking. And he thought about what it was going to cost to do the right thing, and whether he was actually going to do it. He opened his phone. Not his work phone, his personal one, the thread. He typed, "Question for you. If you found out you'd been given an advantage you didn't ask for, something that gave you insight you shouldn't have, would you use it, even if you couldn't tell the other person you had it?" The reply from Callie came slowly. "No," she wrote. "Because the moment you use it, you've made a choice. And choices like that have a way of defining you before you realize it." He read it 3 times. "Even if your intentions were good," he typed. "Intentions are what you start with," she wrote. "Actions are what you end up being." He put the phone down, picked it up again, put it down. He went to bed and did not sleep well. The elevator Friday afternoon. Callie reached it first. Marcus arrived as the doors were opening. They stepped in at the same moment, and the space was small. The lobby below still 12 floors away, and neither of them spoke immediately. "Good week," he said. It came out less professionally than it usually did. "Productive," she said, using his word back at him, and something crossed his face that was almost amusement. The elevator was quiet, except for the mechanical sound of its own descent. "Callie," he said. Her first name. He'd never used it. She turned to look at him, and what she saw in his face was different from everything she'd categorized in the past 3 weeks. Not the professional assessment, not the careful distance, not the measured courtesy. Something else. Something that had the specific quality of a decision about to be made. She felt her heart do something inadvisable. The elevator stopped at the 8th floor. 2 people from the accounting department got in, chatting about weekend plans. The space contracted. Marcus looked forward at the elevator doors, his face returning to its professional arrangement, and Callie looked forward too. And whatever had been about to happen passed through the gap and was gone. In the lobby, they separated with professional politeness. She went to her car. She sat in the parking structure for 10 minutes. She did not text Em. She did not know what she would say. She drove home the long way, past the lake where the water was dark and the city lights floated on its surface like something that couldn't quite decide whether to sink. I've known for 2 weeks. The coffee shop was called Still Water, and it was the kind of place that Callie would have chosen if she'd been choosing small, not loud. The kind of exposed brick walls that felt genuine rather than designed, a smell of dark roast, and something baked that she couldn't identify but was good. She'd been here before on Saturday mornings. She'd suggested it in the thread 3 weeks ago when M had said he was coming to Austin for work, and they had, with a kind of careful, thrilling slowness the way you approached something fragile, agreed to meet. She arrived at 7:58. She had dressed with the same care she brought to everything important. Not overdressed, not underdressed herself, but the best version. The version that had filed all the anxiety somewhere quiet and showed up fully present. She ordered a coffee she wouldn't drink if her hands weren't steady, found a table by the window, and sat down. She did not know what he looked like. She knew his voice through text, the rhythm of how he thought, the particular shape of his humor, the way he went quiet when something was worth taking seriously. She knew he was someone who had never learned to be casual about things that mattered to him, even when he tried. She knew he was in Austin for work, and that the work was complicated, and that he'd been carrying something for the past 2 weeks that he hadn't fully told her. She did not know his face. The door opened at 8:02. Callie looked up with a combination of anticipation and terror that 3 months of wanting something could produce, and she had exactly 1 second, 1 single second, before her brain processed what her eyes were showing her. Marcus Webb was standing in the doorway of Stillwater Coffee Shop, wearing a coat she hadn't seen before, looking directly at her with the expression of a man who already knew, who had known, before he walked through the door, who had come here knowing exactly what he would find. Time did a strange thing. Not slow motion, more like compression, like all the information of the past 3 months trying to pass through a single point simultaneously. M, wrong number. 3 months. Wrong door, right room. Do you think there's a version of brave that isn't terrifying? I've made decisions that felt strategic and then lived with what they cost. I have a few of those. I'm not always great at telling the difference. More than I should be working on it. Marcus. She stood up. She didn't plan to, her body just did it. He walked to her table and stopped across from her, and she saw everything she'd categorized over 3 weeks, the professional mask, the careful distance, completely, utterly gone. What was left was someone who looked the way people looked when they'd been found. "You knew," she said. It came out very quiet. "Callie, you knew," she said again. Not a question this time. He sat down. She didn't. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her, and when he spoke, his voice had none of the controlled evenness she was used to. "I know who you are," he said. "I've known for 2 weeks. And I swear to God I was going to tell you tonight." The coffee shop continued around them. Quiet. Warm other people with other mornings. Callie stood there and felt the shape of the past 3 months reorganizing itself around this fact, every conversation acquiring a second layer. Every moment he'd looked at her in the conference room or said something that landed slightly too directly or brought her a sandwich from the cart downstairs, all of it now with this layer underneath it. He knew. He looked at her every day, knowing. He answered her texts every night, knowing. She sat down because her legs decided that standing was not available right now. "How?" she asked. He told her the accidental open thread in a work archive 3 months ago that matched the conversation. The text she'd sent to his work number that confirmed it. The 2 weeks after that when he'd known and said nothing. He told her everything, and his voice was steady, but his hands on the table were not. And she recognized she could not help recognizing, because she had known him for 3 months, even if she hadn't known his face, that this was the thing he'd been carrying. The thing that had made him go quiet in the elevator and bring her a sandwich from the cart and almost say something 24 times and then not say it. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because I was afraid," he said. Not of the professional implications. of losing. He stopped, looked at his hands. I was afraid that if you knew, you'd go, and I wasn't ready to find out whether you would. Callie looked at him, at this face she hadn't known, and already knew this person she'd been talking to in the dark for 3 months, and felt something very complicated happening in her chest, something that included hurt and fury and recognition, and the particular grief of something that was true being complicated into something painful. That wasn't your decision to make, she said. No, he said. It wasn't. I know that. She picked up her untouched coffee and put it back down. Outside, Austin was doing its morning thing, bright, mild, indifferent to whatever was happening in Stillwater Coffee Shop. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it out of reflex. It was Priya. The message said, "Where are you? We need you, here, now. Something's happening with the board." The board meeting had been called for 9 o'clock. By 8:45, when Callie arrived at the Hartwell building with Marcus 2 steps behind her and a situation she had not yet finished processing trailing them both like weather, Priya was waiting in the lobby with the specific expression that meant bad news that had been organized into something manageable. "Diane Webb," Priya said. She called an emergency session with the full Webb Holdings board. She is presenting something she's calling a conflict of interest report. Callie and Marcus looked at each other. Whatever was happening between them, whatever needed to be said and finished and decided, went sideways into a locked compartment that could not be opened right now. "What's in the report?" Marcus asked. "I don't know everything," Priya said. "But I know it's about you two. And I know she has screenshots." Diane Webb had the particular gift of making a room feel like it had always been hers. Callie had never met her, but she'd done her research 3 weeks ago when she'd started mapping the Webb Holdings family structure for her own purposes. Diane was Marcus's first cousin on his mother's side, not by blood, technically, because she'd been adopted into the family at age 7, a detail that appeared in no official documents, but was known within the organization in the way that private family facts were always known within organizations. She was 41, had a law degree. She'd deployed strategically rather than practicing, and had spent the past 8 years positioning herself in the holding company's administrative structure, while Marcus had been doing operational work in the field. She stood at the head of the conference table. In Webb Holdings' Austin satellite boardroom, they kept a space in the building for regional reviews, with the composed confidence of someone who had rehearsed this and knew the ending. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she said to the 3 board members who had dialed in remotely and the 2 who were physically present. "I've called this session because I believe there is a material conflict of interest in the Austin branch evaluation that requires the board's attention before the final report is submitted." She presented her case with skill Callie would give her that. She had screenshots of the anonymous text thread, obtained somehow from Marcus's personal device or cloud account, redacted, of identifying information, but time-stamped in ways that overlapped precisely with the review period. She had the text Callie had sent to Marcus's work number. She had a timeline that mapped the personal communication against the professional evaluation, and she presented it with the flat, factual tone of someone making a legal argument rather than a personal attack. "The branch manager and the evaluating director have maintained a personal relationship throughout the review period," Diane concluded. "The objectivity of Mr. Webb's evaluation is therefore compromised, and I would argue that the board should consider appointing an independent evaluator." The board members were asking questions before Diane had finished her last sentence. Marcus, sitting to Callie's left, was very still in the way that she had learned meant he was thinking at high speed rather than shutting down. Callie was thinking too. She was thinking about 3 months of conversations in the dark, about the rules she'd set and why she'd set them, about what it would mean to open that thread in this room, in this context, in front of people who held her branch's future in their hands, about what it would cost. She was thinking about what M had said, Marcus, she corrected herself, Marcus had said, about intentions being what you started with, and actions being what you ended up being. She was thinking about brave. "May I speak?" she said. The board member running the session looked at her. "Ms. Nguyen?" "I have information relevant to the timeline," she said. "I'd like to present it directly." She asked for 20 minutes. She got 15. She used all of them. She stood at the end of the table with her phone and walked the board through the thread. Not all of it, but the key timestamps, the key moments. The structural fact that the conversation had begun with a misdirected text 3 months before Marcus Webb had set foot in Austin, that she had not known his identity, that he had not known hers, that the professional review and the personal connection had been established and maintained in separate compartments until 45 minutes ago, when she'd discovered the intersection. She also put up her branch's 4-year performance data, because she was not going to stand in this room and fight only on emotional grounds when she had numbers on her side. She was mortified. She was exposed in a way she had spent years specifically engineering her life to avoid. The private thing made public, the compartment opened in front of people who were evaluating her. But she was present. She did not flinch. She said the true things in the clearest language she could find, and she let the board see what the situation actually was, rather than what Diane had framed it as. When she finished, the board was quiet. Diane said, "The timeline Ms. Nguyen presents doesn't change the fact that Mr. Webb became aware of the connection 2 weeks ago and did not disclose it." "No," Callie said. "It doesn't." She looked at the board. "That's a fair criticism of his judgment. It's a separate question from whether the evaluation itself is compromised, and I'd ask you to consider them separately." Marcus spoke then for the first time. His voice was entirely level. "I'll recuse myself from the final recommendation," he said. "The evaluation data I've gathered over the past 3 weeks is complete and can be reviewed by an independent assessor. I should have disclosed the personal connection 2 weeks ago. I didn't. That's my error, and I take responsibility for it." The board exchanged looks. The session leader said, "We'll need to discuss this privately. We'll reconvene in an hour." In the hallway outside, Callie leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling. Marcus stood next to her. Not close, close enough. "That was either very brave or very stupid," he said. "Those are the same thing pretty often," she said. "Callie." His voice had the quality it had in the elevator, the thing he'd been about to say. "I'm sorry for the 2 weeks. I should have—" "Yes," she said. "You should have." She looked at him. "I understand why you didn't. I don't think it makes you a bad person. But I'm not ready to say it was okay, because it wasn't." He held her gaze. "Okay," he said. That was all. No arguments, no additional explanation, just the word, received, accepted. She looked at him for a long time, at the face she now knew, the face that went with the voice she'd been hearing for 3 months, and felt the complicated thing in her chest, still moving, still unresolved, not finished. "The board might still close the branch," she said. "They might," he said. "I don't control that anymore." "Diane might still win," she said. "She might." He paused. "She won't, but she might." "You don't know that." "I know the data," he said. "The branch is solid. The case you just made in there was better than anything I would have submitted." He looked at her. "You didn't need me. You never did." She absorbed this, let it settle. "That's not the point," she said. "I know," he said, and she heard in it she knew him well enough, 3 months of knowing, to hear in it the thing he wasn't saying, yet the thing that would need to be said later in a different context, when the board had made its decision and the professional situation had resolved into something with a shape, and they could stand in it and see each other clearly. She looked forward at the hallway wall. "Go find somewhere else to be," she said. "I need to think." He went. She stood in the hallway alone and thought about brave and what it cost, and whether the thing you ended up being was worth the price of what you did to get there. Her hands, she noticed, had finally stopped shaking. Wrong number, right person. The board reconvened at 10:45 rather than 10 because boards always reconvened later than they said they would. And Callie spent the extra 45 minutes in the building's small break room, drinking bad coffee and revising nothing about what she'd said, because the revision period was over, and what she'd said was what she'd said, and she was going to live with it. Priya came by at 10:15 with the better coffee from the cart outside, and said nothing, just set it on the table and sat across from her, which was exactly the right thing to do. And also exactly the reason Callie had fought for 3 weeks to protect the jobs of the 41 people who had chosen to show up for this branch every day. "Whatever happens," Priya said finally. "I know," Callie said. "You did the right thing in there." "I know that too," Callie said. "It doesn't make it feel less terrible." "No," Priya agreed. "The right things rarely do." They sat with the bad and good coffee until Callie's phone buzzed with the message from the board coordinator that the session was reconvening. The boardroom had a different quality the second time, settled like a room after a decision has been made in it, and the air has reorganized itself around the fact of the decision. Callie registered this before anyone spoke and felt her heartbeat doing something she acknowledged and set aside. Diane was already seated. She was composed in the way of someone who had prepared for multiple outcomes and was waiting to see which one arrived. Marcus was not in the room. Callie had asked him to stay out, and he had. The session leader, a woman in her 60s named Ruth Hartley, who had the quality of someone who had been in enough rooms to know exactly which ones to take seriously, looked at Callie when she sat down. "Ms. Nguyen," Ruth said, "before I share the board's preliminary position, I'd like to address Ms. Webb's report directly." Diane looked forward with the stillness of someone maintaining position. "The board has reviewed the timeline you presented," Ruth said. "We're satisfied that the personal connection between yourself and Mr. Webb predates the professional evaluation and was not established with knowledge of his role. The evaluation data gathered during the review period will be submitted to an independent assessor for verification, as standard protocol would require in a recusal situation." She paused. "This process will take approximately 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Callie processed this. The branch was not being closed today. The branch was not being closed today. However, Ruth said, and Callie's whole body went very still. "I want to be direct about something." She looked at Diane. "The board is also requesting an internal review of the circumstances under which Ms. Webb obtained personal communications from Mr. Webb's private accounts. That information was presented in a formal board session, and its acquisition raises its own questions of appropriate conduct." Diane's composure did not break, but something at the edges of it, something very small, shifted. "I obtained that information through legitimate means," Diane said. "That will be part of the review," Ruth said with the even tone of someone who had already decided what they thought and was now in the procedural phase of confirming it. She looked at Callie. "Do you have any questions?" "One," Callie said. "The independent assessment, will it use the data Mr. Webb gathered or start from scratch?" "His data as the foundation," Ruth said. "The assessor will verify and supplement." "Then the branch's case is already in front of them," Callie said. "I'm satisfied with that." Ruth nodded. "We're adjourned for today. We'll reconvene when the assessment is complete." The room cleared. Callie stayed in her chair for a moment, not because she needed to, but because her legs had decided to take 30 seconds off, and she was willing to give them that. Diane did not immediately leave. She stood at the far end of the table, and Callie, looking at her from across the length of the room, understood, without deciding to, that this was the conversation that needed to happen. She stood up and walked to where Diane was standing. Diane watched her come with the stillness of someone who had expected this and was not afraid of it. "You went through his phone?" Callie said. "Not an accusation exactly, just the fact named." "I accessed information relevant to a board matter," Diane said. "That's a way to say it," Callie said. "Here's another way. You found something personal between your cousin and another person, and you put it in front of a room full of people who could do maximum damage with it." She kept her voice level. She had not come here to perform anger. "I'm not here to fight you. I want to understand something." Diane looked at her with eyes that were measuring, even now, the professional habit that never quite shut off in people who had learned young that rooms were things to be evaluated before you entered them. "What?" Diane said. "What did you actually want to happen?" Callie asked. "Not with the branch, not with the board. What did you want to happen to Marcus?" The stillness cracked. Almost imperceptibly, a fractional shift in Diane's face in the set of her mouth. But Callie saw it because she had been watching carefully for it. "That's not relevant," Diane said. "I think it's the only relevant thing," Callie said. "I've been thinking about it since Ruth announced the review. You didn't need the screenshots to make a conflict of interest argument. A simple disclosure to the board would have triggered a recusal. You went further. You made it as damaging as possible." She paused. "That's not a business strategy. That's something else." Diane looked at the table. For just a moment, in the particular quality of that not looking, Callie saw something she recognized. The posture of someone who was very tired of holding something up. "He was going to succeed," Diane said. Her voice was still controlled, but the control was over something real now, not over absence. "He was going to come back from this review with a win, and then the next one, and the board was going to look at him the way they always look at him, and I was going to be—" She stopped. "Not enough," Callie said. Diane looked up sharply. "I'm not saying that to hurt you," Callie said. "I'm saying it because I think that's the thing you've been afraid of for a long time, and I understand that fear better than I'd like to." The boardroom was very quiet. "You don't know anything about me," Diane said, but the edge of it was gone. "No," Callie agreed. "But I know what it looks like when someone burns something down because they're afraid of being left out of whatever comes next." She held Diane's gaze. "The board's review is going to find what it finds. That's not in either of our hands now. But whatever happens, don't let the thing you're afraid of turn you into someone you're not going to want to have been." Diane looked at her for a long, flat moment. Then she picked up her folder and her phone and walked out of the boardroom, and Callie watched her go and felt not triumph, but the complicated exhaustion that came from saying a true thing to someone who might or might not be able to hear it. She gathered her own things and went to find Marcus. He was in the stairwell. Not hiding, just using the space the way she would have. Somewhere that wasn't a hallway where people passed with purpose and expectation, but also wasn't a room with a door and the implication of a conversation that needed to be contained. She found him on the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors, standing with his back against the wall and his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular. He looked up when he heard her come through the door. She sat down on the top step of the landing, which was not elegant, but was accurate to how she was feeling, and he looked at her for a moment and then sat down on the step below her, so they were almost level, almost eye to eye. "How did it go?" he asked. "Independent assessment. 3 weeks. The branch stays open pending results." She paused. "There's also going to be a review of how Diane got the screenshots." Something in his face complicated. "I should have—" "Yes," she said. "But we already covered that." He accepted this. "How are you?" "I had about 3 months of conversations that I thought were private," she said. "And I just put the most personal parts of them in front of a room full of people who are deciding my professional future. So I'm a little—" She looked for the word. "Raw." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. That's on me." "It's also on Diane," she said. "And on me for not— I don't know, for not having some system that would have caught this earlier." She shook her head. "I don't know how you catch something like this earlier." "You don't," he said. "You set up your rules and you try, and then something arrives sideways and the rules weren't written for it." She looked at him, looked at the person who was sitting on the step below her in a stairwell in the Hartwell building in Austin, Texas in November. A person she had talked to every night for 3 months and met in a coffee shop 90 minutes ago, and still did not fully know, and also undeniably knew very well. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay." "When you were sitting in that hotel room every night texting me, was any of it strategic? Were you using anything I said?" He didn't answer immediately. and she respected him for that, for not giving her the easy reassurance before he'd actually checked. "No," he said. "The review was the review. The texts were—" He stopped, started again. "The texts were the only part of my day that I wasn't working. The only part where I was just—" He looked at her. "Just myself, with someone who didn't know what I was supposed to be." She held his gaze for a moment. "That's what I needed it for too," she said. "Just so you know." "I know," he said quietly. "I always knew that. That's why I didn't want to." He stopped again. "It doesn't excuse what I did." "No," she agreed. "It explains it. That's different." The stairwell was quiet except for the faint sound of the building around them ventilation, distant footsteps on other floors, the low hum of a structure full of people doing their work. "What do we do now?" Marcus said. "The board does its assessment," Callie said. "You do your recusal correctly. I go back to running the branch and making the case I've been making for 3 weeks, except now an independent assessor is going to verify it, which, honestly—" She almost smiled. "Honestly, I'm not afraid of that part." "I know you're not," he said. "Your numbers are right." "My numbers are always right," she said. The almost smile became something more actual briefly, and he matched it. A real thing, the kind that happened before either of them could decide about it. "I know that too," he said. She looked at her hands, then back at him. "As for the other part," she said, "I don't know yet. I'm not ready to know yet. I need to—" She looked for the right way to say it. "I need the 2 rooms to be 2 rooms again for a little while, before I decide whether I want to see what it looks like when they're in the same place." He nodded, slowly. "Okay." "Is that okay?" she asked, because she realized she'd said it as if it weren't a question, and it was. "Yes," he said. "I'll wait." "Don't wait," she said. "That's not what I mean. I mean—" She thought about how to say it, the thing she'd been thinking since the stairwell door had swung shut behind her, since she'd sat down on this step and looked at this person and felt the thing in her chest that was still complicated and real. "I mean that I want to find out what this is when it isn't a crisis, and I don't know how long that takes, but I'd like to find out." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "Wrong door," he said. "Right room," she said. Outside, through the small stairwell window, Austin was doing what Austin did in November, bright and mild, and entirely indifferent to the drama of human beings sorting out their hearts in stairwells. The light came through the glass at a low angle, the kind of light that made everything look like the end of something, and also, if you were willing to look at it that way, like the start. She stood up. He stood up. They did not hug, did not make promises, did not resolve anything with one conclusive gesture, because that was not what the moment was. The moment was a beginning that required honest eyes and time and the willingness to let 2 separate things, the professional and the personal, the known and the still unknown, find their way toward the same room slowly, without rushing. She opened the stairwell door. "I'm going back to work," she said. "I'm going to arrange the recusal paperwork," he said. "Good," she said. She went back to work. He arranged the recusal paperwork. The independent assessment took 22 days. The assessor was a woman from the Chicago office who had a reputation for being thorough, in the same way Marcus had a reputation for being thorough, careful, specific, unwilling to reach past what the evidence actually said. She spent 4 days in the branch. She talked to all the department heads. She sat down with Priya for 2 hours, and with 3 of the project leads, and with Callie, for a total of 5 separate meetings, each one focused on a different aspect of the branch's operations. Callie answered every question the same way she answered every question, completely specifically, without softening the difficult parts or overselling the strong ones. The assessment came back 2 weeks later. The Austin branch showed strong operational fundamentals and clear growth trajectory. It was not a branch at its ceiling. It was a branch with unmet potential. The board's recommendation, accepted unanimously, was to maintain the branch with a 2-year growth plan and a performance review at 18 months. Priya cried briefly, and without embarrassment, in Callie's office. 2 of the project leads bought everyone coffee from the cart outside. The accounting department sent a group email with exactly 1 word in it: yes. Callie sat at her desk after everyone had gone back to work and looked at the Austin skyline through the floor-to-ceiling glass and felt something that was partly relief and partly a deep, specific satisfaction that had nothing to do with winning and everything to do with having been right about something that mattered. Her phone was on her desk. She picked it up. She opened the thread, the one that had started with a stranger texting the wrong number on a Thursday night in October. The one that was no longer anonymous on either end. The one she had put in front of a room full of people, and that had survived the room, and was still there on her screen. Still exactly itself. She typed, "The assessment came back. We're staying." The reply came in 4 minutes, which meant he was somewhere he could see his phone and had been watching for it. "I know," he wrote. "Ruth called me. I was waiting to hear it from you." She looked at that for a moment. "Buy me coffee," she typed. Not professional, not a meeting, just coffee. The reply was immediate this time. "Still water," he wrote. 7 o'clock. She looked out at the Austin skyline, the evening light catching the glass buildings, the city making its low, constant hum. Everything she'd built still here, still standing, still hers. 7 o'clock, she wrote back. She put her phone down. She finished the notes she'd been writing. She turned off the office lights at 6:15, which was early for her, and took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the Austin evening, where the air was mild and the city was doing its thing, indifferent and alive, and hers. She drove to Stillwater the direct way this time, not the long way past the lake, because she was not in the mood for beauty and longing. She was in the mood for arriving somewhere. He was there when she walked in. He'd gotten there first, found a table by the window, the same table she'd been sitting at the first time. The table where the world had reorganized itself around a fact neither of them had been prepared for. He was not looking at his phone. He was looking at the door because he'd been waiting for her. She sat down across from him. The barista came by and she ordered her coffee and he ordered his, and then they were just 2 people at a table by a window in a coffee shop in Austin on a November evening. And the context that had surrounded every interaction they'd ever had, the review, the board, the crisis. The professional stakes was somewhere else for the first time. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. Outside, a couple walked past with a dog on a leash. The streetlights were coming on. The coffee arrived and was hot and smelled exactly right. "I have something to tell you," Marcus said. "I should have said it in the stairwell, and I didn't." She looked at him. "I would have recused myself," he said. "Even if you hadn't gone to the board first, I'd been planning to. The morning of—" He stopped. "I'd already drafted the recusal request before we were supposed to meet at the coffee shop. I was going to file it and then tell you everything." She held his gaze. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because I don't want you to wonder later whether you had to save yourself from me," he said. "You didn't. You saved the branch because you're the right person to have built it, but I wasn't the threat you might have thought I was." She thought about this honestly. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I believe you," she said. "And I also think that even if you'd done all of that, I still would have gone to the board, because I wasn't going to let someone else control the narrative about my own branch. That's not about you. That's just who I am." Something in his face did the thing she'd been cataloging for weeks, the shift that wasn't professional, wasn't controlled, was just him. "I know," he said. "That's one of my favorite things about you." She looked at him. Across a table in full light, no anonymity, no professional buffer, no crisis to manage. Just this. "I have a list," she said. "Of what?" "Favorite things about you," she said. "Remember I told you I'd tell you when I had the order right?" He went very still in the way he went very still when something mattered. "I have the order now," she said. "Tell me," he said. She did. She told him not all of it, not in one sitting, because some things needed more than one sitting, and she was wise enough to know that. But she told him the first few, the ones at the top, the ones she'd been holding in the category of things to say when the time was right. He listened to all of it without looking away. Then he told her his. She hadn't asked, but he told her anyway the ones he had for her. The ones that had accumulated over 3 months and 12 more days, and a boardroom and a stairwell and a drive across Austin on a November evening to get here. Outside, the city was going about its night. The coffee got cold. Neither of them noticed for a while. "So," she said. "Wrong door." "Right room," he said. "What do we do with it?" she asked. He thought about it, genuinely, not a performance of thinking. The actual consideration of the question that she'd learned was the kind of person he was. "We find out," he said, carefully, without hiding anything, starting from where we actually are. "Which is?" she asked. "Two people who know each other better than they probably should," he said, given that one of them was trying very hard not to, and the other had a strict no-names rule. "In my defense," she said, "it was a good rule." "It was a good rule," he agreed. "I liked that about you, even before I knew it was you." She looked at him across the table. This face she knew, this person she'd talked to in the dark, and faced in conference rooms, and stood next to in stairwells, and felt something settle. Not resolution, not the clean completion of a problem solved. Something more honest than that. The feeling of being in the right room, knowing it, and choosing to stay. "I have a new rule," she said. "Yeah?" "No hiding," she said. "If something is true, we say it." "Even when it's difficult?" he asked. "Especially then," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached across the table, not dramatically, not as a gesture, just as the natural next thing. And his hand covered hers on the table, and she turned her hand over and held his. Outside, Austin was enormous and mild and entirely itself. The streetlights were all on now. The coffee shop was warm. She stayed in the room.